right, we are live, and this is the third session of an interview with Bishop J. Kevin Boland of the Diocese of Savannah. Today is Tuesday, August the 9th, 2011. It's 3 p.m. We are in his study at the Diocese office on East Liberty Street in Savannah, and my name is Robin Wright-Gunn. I'm the interviewer. And the first question I'm going to ask you, Bishop Boland, is a follow-up from our last session that I neglected to ask you. That is, we were talking about some of the more difficult tasks or assignments that came up during your time as bishop in Savannah. And I wanted to specifically talk about 2 or 3 other things that happened during the time when you were the bishop in Savannah. And one of those is the merging of some of the parishes. I believe that was right around 1999 or 2000 when I know Nativity Parish became St. Peter and Paul, and the Vietnamese language service started there, and then the merging of 2 historically black parishes in west side Savannah. Those are the 2 that I know of personally, but I don't know if in the other areas of the diocese there were others. So can you talk a little about how that came to be and just the result, how that's gone since then, any comments you have on that?
Well, my first comment is that historically, or throughout the United States, as the dioceses have all grappled with this, and we only had to do it on a kind of a small scale, but I recognize that some of the dioceses, especially in the Northeast, this is a monumental challenge because of the demographics and people moving from one place to another and leaving these big churches with no one to staff them or no one to support them. Coming to our own situation, I will deal with the 2 that are associated with the Savannah area. And one was the very substantial growth of the Vietnamese community in Savannah. And I was involved in that even before I became a bishop. I was helping other people and part of helping the refugees from Vietnam find jobs, find places to live, so on and so forth. And a lot of it was together with other churches in the community. But we played a pretty prominent part in helping a lot of them. And it turned out that the efforts made for this refugee settlement was very successful in the Savannah area, and many of them got significant jobs, and they're very work orientated, very education orientated. So in time they got to be a substantial presence, and they wanted a place of their own to worship. And they approached me at that time to buy a place. I think it was on like 33rd Street or 34th Street or something like that, which was another church or something, and it was kind of a bit back from the main road, be difficult to find. And at the time the question came up about Nativity Parish, because Nativity was kind of more growing when St. Peter's Parish was established with a school in Wilmington Island. Mm-hmm. It took away significantly from the number of people, or the future viability, let's say, of Nativity. So Nativity was originally a cut-off from Blessed Sacrament Parish. So we studied it, and we kind of came up with a conclusion after everyone had their input that why spend all this money in building a new church for the Vietnamese? We had already all these churches. Up to that time, the Vietnamese used to meet in the basement of the cathedral, as we called it, and that's where they had their Sunday Mass. So my reflection on that is that the great, great difficulty was the people of Nativity were so attached to their church that they did not, as it were, want to give it up because they kind of knew what happened. They were not growing. So we came to a compromise, which in time has the hurt that they suffered has been healed in time. But some of them were very, very hurt when I made the decision that we were going to use these facilities for the establishment of St. Peter and Paul Vietnamese parish.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the compromise was that Father Kim, who is still the priest there today, was also able to provide them an English Mass. And so we didn't kind of take away everything from them. But they were given the option of going either to the new St. Peter's or to Blessed Sacrament, and some of them stayed there. And there is still an English Mass there on Sunday morning, or I think on Sunday morning they have one.
Mm-hmm.
And I would advise, time has shown that we did the right thing. That community has gone in there. They keep the facilities beautiful. They've added to them. They've put in a magnificent hall, which is probably the biggest structure in Thunderbolt today. And they use it with great capacity for their own celebrations. And one of the things that I look forward to every year is going to the Tet celebration, which is their New Year celebration. It's usually with the dragons up and down, and they greet you after Mass, and their worship is very, very beautiful. They sing most of the Mass, and they have a great tradition of taking care of the elderly in their community. So when I celebrate Mass at St. Peter and Paul, they have all the elderly up front, and they want to make sure they're taken care of, both at the Mass and at the receptions that follow.
Mm.
It now has there are small numbers of the, let's say, called the Anglo community, who are now part also of the Vietnamese community, and are very helpful to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it has worked out well.
So do you feel like, when you look back at, I'm sure there were lots of meetings and whatnot, do you feel like there are things, perhaps if they'd been done differently just in the process, that it would have been, are there things you would have done differently now that you know what you know now?
Yeah, it made me, it's funny, I kind of, once you get over the hardship of it, you're inclined to go on to the next challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So I forget the details.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe we did not, I don't know, we did have town hall meetings there which were very, very emotional and very, very strong. Maybe we did not involve the Anglo community enough to show them what the final picture would be like.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe at the same time we didn't know what the final picture looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I would say in all of our cases, for all of us who were not used to that type of going in and trying to bring two groups together, that's a significant skill set. And sometimes you have it and sometimes you don't. But overall, it was kind of ugly at times, but not so ugly that it couldn't work. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So the other merger in Savannah was, and I can't, St. Mary's and
it was the other merger was St. Anthony's and Most Pure Heart of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
The Most Pure Heart of Mary is over on the west side, and St. Anthony's is there on Fell Street, just off of Bay Street Extended. That one was a kind of a natural. We had 3 African American parishes in the city, and there was talk about building a church for one or both of them. And so amongst themselves they realized it would not be good for both of us kind of to build a church, or can we get together? And in the meantime, both of their schools no longer existed. One time they both had schools, as did St. Benedict's here on East Broad Street. So the schools were gone. So having a school in your parish can be a great kind of boost as far as growth and establishment of programs and all that. So neither one of them had a school now. In this interview, I want to give this worked way beyond our expectations, way beyond our expectations. And I give full credit to Father Robert Cheney, who is the present day pastor of the new church. The merger was, we selected a different name, and the new name is Resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was no longer Most Pure Heart of Mary, it was no longer St. Anthony's. The new name will come together and will be a resurrection parish. We will be full of life. And I was with them. Now they had lots and lots of meetings, many of them I went to between both groups, assessing what they had and what they didn't have. And I would say at the end of the day, they decided that to build a new church where St. Anthony's was the thing to do, with the understanding that the old facilities which they would be leaving, that they could use them for a year or so for people who really wanted to be buried from there. And I remember Deacon Frank Mattis, who was one of the first black deacons, like in our diocese. He was buried from there. That was his first love, Most Pure Heart of Mary. Mm-hmm. And at that time the place was closed, but Father Cheney would open it up for special events like that.
Mm-hmm.
Today, Resurrection, as we call it, is a beautiful, beautiful new church and a very vital community. And I would say there's no residual effects whatsoever of closing out Most Pure Heart of Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And that property is still there, but when the property is, if and when it is sold, the assets from it would go to Resurrection Parish. That was always understood, that these two churches and schools and buildings would belong to the one entity at the end of the day.
Now there is a community center that, does St. Joseph's Candler run it now?
Correct.
In the old St. Mary's?
In old St. Mary's, right.
And is that in the church building, or is that?
It's in the school building.
Okay.
School building, yeah. There's nothing right now in the church building.
Okay.
Yeah. The school building has that centre,
Mm-hmm.
sponsored by St. And then there's kind of a hall also. There's a school which had a hall. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and of course that whole area has kind of resurrected itself.
Absolutely.
With apartments and that type of thing.
And then the new church was arsoned
correct, right.
and
yes,
re-resurrected.
correct,
So
yeah.
that was something.
Yeah.
So were there other mergers of parishes or closing of parishes outside of the Savannah area?
Yes, well, in Augusta, we're kind of still living there. In Augusta, but that goes back to the 1970s, was not during my time. And that's when in downtown Augusta, they merged 3 parishes. Sacred Heart Parish, which used to be run by the Jesuit community, what was at that time known as St. Patrick's Parish, and then Immaculate Conception Parish, which was African American. And they had a school, Sacred Heart had the school. Today both schools are closed. Well, but Immaculate Conception School has come to the new location where what we now call Holy Trinity Parish.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was, I guess in some ways that was a bloodbath. That was very, very difficult. I was like a chancery official. I travelled with Bishop Fry to some of the meetings. But some of the priests today who were very much involved with the respective pastors and trying to do what the bishop wanted to do, which we knew, but it was very, very difficult. They both had great traditions attached to them, all 3 parishes. Well, one was African American, one was one of the oldest parishes in our diocese, and then the Sacred Heart Parish, run staffed by the Jesuits for 70 years, had a great tradition to it. And when the church was selected, which one of the 3, well, it was obvious to be either Holy Trinity or Sacred Heart. They were the big churches. Sacred Heart is a Moorish architecture, red brick, stained glass coming out your ears, magnificent. But the other church was selected because of its historic status in the diocese. It's got 5 or 6 priests buried underneath in the crypt, and the second bishop of the diocese is buried there. Now that in itself would not justify the reason, because you could have moved those bodies and that type of thing. but was thought that that was the better selection. And it's working out well, relatively well. It's had its ups and downs. It took an awful long time for like maybe 10, 15 years before the kind of the hurt began to heal in many cases there.
Well, for it still to just be starting to work out, and it's been 35 or 40 years, that does sound like it was difficult. Those were hard times,
very hard
socially times. Anyway. You know, to merge an African American and a white parish in the 70s in Georgia would have been a challenge, I think.
Right, and there was 2 white churches,
Mm-hmm.
And there was a danger, and that happened to us, that they would be kind of suffocated by the process and lose their leadership status that they would have in their own church. Also, finances came into it. In those days, there was something like 6 priests in downtown Augusta serving these 3 parishes.
Oh.
And all the people were moving. They were all tiny little congregations.
Mm-hmm.
They were all moving up to St. Mary's in the Hill, or now they're moving further, fit out in Columbia County. And so just the sheer cost of paying the light bill in some place like Sacred Heart Parish would have been very, very expensive. Mm-hmm. But it was difficult, and Bishop Fry suffered greatly with that one. Yeah. So
the last 2 on this topic, St. Mary's Home closed earlier this year, and St. Michael's School at Tybee Island did too. So any thoughts on those 2? And I know they're very different sets of circumstances.
St. Mary's Home kind of took care of itself. Like we'd no option at the end of the day. The St. Mary's Home in its heyday took care of 30 to 40 children perhaps. Full care, beautiful care, education, dormitory space. It was like a home away from home, run by the Sisters of Mercy. As you know, foster homes or homes like that are greatly, legitimately so, controlled by state regulations, so on and so forth. And in the latter years, St. Mary's would date from the 1930s right up to last year, 2010, when it closed. What happened was St. Mary's Home became strongly dependent on young people to be referred to them by the state courts and children who needed help or who had no place to go. And St. Mary's Home, for so many of the judges, and that was their first option, send them there because they knew what great care they would get, etc. In time, in the whole business of child care and foster care, there was a switch towards what you call family-orientated sponsoring, where kids would be placed in foster homes with what was the equivalency of a family. And so St. Mary's Home fell on bad times because they weren't getting the children. When you didn't get the children, you didn't get the per diem from the state, so on and so forth. Although in its day, St. Mary's Home was probably fully supported by the Diocese of Savannah, with the Christmas collection all over South Georgia was always for St. Mary's Home. And normally it would exceed $100,000, which in this day was. And then there was big fundraising for St. Mary's, but it was the easiest fundraising in town. St. Mary's Home was greatly loved by, the people generally, Catholics and non-Catholics. They all understood what a great place it was. But then they were down to 7 children. And if you saw the size of the home, a home that could take care of 4 times that, if not 5. And the cost of running the home just became astronomical. And there was no guarantee that in that time those 7 kids would not be one by one taken from you, as it were, like in that generic sense, and put in a foster home. The state, in its regulations, gave primary preference to that type of childcare. So on June the 30th, we made a decided decision with the Sisters of Mercy out front, like by about 3 or 4 months, we're going to close our doors. So as everyone had plenty of time to relocate their children, make the necessity. Closing out a place, I discovered, is much more difficult than opening a place, because there's so many legalities involved and so forth. And we also know now, but we kind of knew that it's much more difficult to take care of a closed building than it is a building that's operating on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a sad chapter in the history of our diocese. But at the same time, when we had the closing Mass and celebration, we were able to contact literally hundreds of people who grew up there and are now adults and have children. And our closing was a welcoming back to all of those who had ever gone there. Mm-hmm. And it was one marvelous day. Mm-hmm. The gratitude of these people, and they just hurriedly went to the different places where they slept, where they had their meals, where they went to school, and then they went to the the picture gallery of who taught them what and who was what, and then they met each other. Some of them, they were scattered all over different parts of it. They met each other. So it was a great act of thanksgiving, in my estimation, what happened that day. So we're now in the process of studying it, like what will we do with this property. It's a beautiful, how the people built it in the 1930s. It's Greek colonnade, Renaissance type of architecture, and built like a Rock of Gibraltar. Probably one of the finest buildings in the, but it's hidden,
Yes.
You've got to find it.
I've only been there one time, and I
Yeah.
lived next door in the apartment complex for probably 6 years.
Oh, did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
and I only have been there once in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So it is definitely tucked away, but that's nice. It gives it a sense of woodsy seclusion
Woodsy,
right in the middle
correct.
of town.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the final thing before we move on is St. Michael's School at Tybee.
Yeah.
That was this year too, or was it last year? I think it was last year.
That was last year.
Mhm.
Last year, yeah. Well, this is this is a kind of funny one. I supported them keeping open the school in all of its drama, but I also understood. I said, you will ultimately will have to make the decision, but for a number of years, it was like they were keeping it open by doing fundraising to the tune of about $80,000 a year, which is difficult for a small school. But they did it for a number of years, and the numbers were not there then, and they were also victimized by the growth of Tybee Island, from being a kind of everyman's island to becoming an island where the property values went skyrocketing all of a sudden, the taxes went up, and many families with children had to leave the island. They couldn't afford to stay on it anymore. So if you lose your children, then you wonder why you want to school, But now it was always a small school, right? It was probably seldom maybe over 120 or 130. And I was pastor. That was my first pastorate. So I had kind of a nostalgic attraction to it. I was there from 1967 to 68 as the pastor. And that was Bishop McDonough made me a pastor, and then he was transferred up to Louisville, Kentucky. Then when the new bishop came, he asked me to leave the parish and come out and work with him. But I enjoyed immensely that 14 months I was there, one school year. So at that time they had several nuns teaching in the parish. They had their own convent there, which is now kind of a home that the diocese used for families of priests and that who want some time at the beach, and we kind of rented out at a very reasonable price. So it was easier to run the school in those days, and they had a lot more children. So in the final analysis, they decided to close the school. Got it. And I said, okay. So
that sounds like a good, when it's their own decision. I mean, even if their hand is forced by circumstance.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, okay, so now what I want to do with our remaining time, and I have this out so that we can keep track of the time, is talk about just some general big picture kinds of things. So at the end of the last session, I talked to you briefly about your essay in here, or the interview with you that's entitled Bishop Boland on the Future, that Father Michael Kavanaugh wrote I'm holding up the history of the Diocese of Savannah that was published just after 2000. And in this, you it's not actually a quote, but it is, it says here, the church is divine in its making and will be divine in its progress. And that is a quote from you, direct quote. And then the next paragraph says, if progress is going to happen, it will happen primarily within the parish. Any bishop finds great solace in parishes that are vital vehicles of bringing hope, encouragement, and reconciliation to people, said Bishop Boland. So, looking to the future, now that you're no longer going to be the person directly responsible for the faith formation of Catholics in South Georgia, how would you define, what do you even mean by progress? If progress is going to happen, it will happen primarily within the parish. How would you define progress? And what do you think can be done to make that happen by your successors?
Well, first of all, I want to say the church and the person of Jesus are one and the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the people in Jesus are one and the same thing. And so when you minister in the church or for the church, progress is made, is that the availability of the message of Christ is given to more people, or more people have access to it, or people who've fallen away from the faith because of the lack of nourishment, or for incidents in their lives that made them, as it were, became very careless about the practice of the faith. Progress, it's not so much economic progress where you're getting more money and you have bigger buildings and all that type of thing. Progress in the faith dimension is that there's more awareness of the presence of Christ in the world and what he can do for people in their life cycle as they go from, say, birth to marriage, to having children, to having more marriages and birth. That in that process, it's all kind of part of God's plan, and that they have a kind of a concept of that.
Mm-hmm.
When I mentioned there that if it's going to happen, it will happen in the parish, I've kind of said this frequently, is where the rubber hits the road. That's why I guess one of the joys of being a bishop in a way, if I'm not going to be a pastor, I'm the pastor of the diocese, but for a bishop that's very generic, it's very broad, it's very big, but I am in reality supposed to be the pastor of the priest, the pastor of all the parishes, which is the reason why they kind of give so much deference, you say, to the office of bishops, not necessarily to the person of the bishop, but to the office. The pastor of that parish, he's with those people Sunday after Sunday. He's with them when they die, when they marry, when they're sick, when there's problems. He is the one that makes that parish vibrate and brings the mystery of Christ into it and into the life of the church. That's progress. Mm-hmm. And the more you can enliven your parish, because a parish is kind of a subset of the diocese. How good is a diocese is as good as its parishes. Mm-hmm. A diocese will be alive and well and something that we can be very proud of, provided the only way it can happen is if the parishes exemplify it. You know? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for good or for bad, you'll find people who'll move into, say, Savannah. And this would never have happened, say, 40 years ago, when the church in its discipline was very strict on parish boundaries. That if you lived on Henry Street, the 400 block, this is where you went to church. And that's the first thing you found out when you... That type of kind of discipline is probably non-existent now. No, it still exists. For the most part, people go to their neighbourhood church. But there's good numbers who figure out where they want to go. And they'll go church hopping and find, well, I like this priest, I like these sermons, I like their music, I like this, I like that. We must be careful with it, because you could kind of dilute what you're really looking for. And so sometimes, well, maybe I'll go to where I'm supposed to go to, like, in that sense. And it may not be always what we want it to be, but at the same time, it doesn't exclude the possibility of finding where Christ is for me, you know what I mean? Like, mothers and fathers don't have the option of just leaving when their kids are, you know. They know that even though the going is tough, this marriage, this commitment that they've made is what they must live through and work through, you know. I think the same is applicable sometimes with a parishioner and his parish. You know. To go back to the point, of course, is that a diocese should be all the time, all the people who work in this pastoral centre, they must be parish orientated. That's who they're serving. They're not serving me. They're serving me as the bishop of these places out there. That's why we have, say, a big building like this, trying to develop programs, trying to develop awareness amongst the different parishes who can be very isolated from each other. And you could say that's one of my joys in a way, that I'm going there representing the wider church when I visit a parish. And I'll go to Glenville this Saturday. I haven't been there in a couple of years, I think. And I know they'll be as happy as the day is long, that I thought enough to come to them, because they're isolated. You know? The nearest church from St. Jude's is probably 20 or 30 miles away. You know? So if they don't get Mass, they probably won't have a chance to get it elsewhere, you know. To go back to the vibrancy of the church and this whole concept of faith, an awful lot is also kind of interdependent on how marriage is celebration, how music is done, what makes... Let me back up something I've always thought as the bishop, and I'm in the cathedral quite frequently, and under Paddy Schreck the music is so good and so powerful. That's an element that attracts people to faith, because the music is done well. And so I would say to any parish, and they know this well, we've got to put our best foot forward. We're dealing with the mystery of Christ, his presence in the church. He deserves the best. But there are some small parishes who've got very little resources. They might, in their 50 families, not have anyone who plays the piano or knows how to do it, you know. And to get one, you might have to get one from the nearest town or something like that. So progress is bringing the ability to bring to these places quality liturgy, quality music, quality preaching, quality attentiveness to the needs of others. If they get sick, how do we take care of them? Do we visit with them both at home and in the hospital? Well, as a priest, before I became a bishop, one of the most special moments, it's a strange thing to say, was the care of the sick and conducting funerals. You know, where you've got to be very careful. Are you bringing them yourself, or are you bringing them to the love of Jesus? You know, so you've always got to keep that in mind. Preparing, again, I'm personalizing it when I was in a parish, preparing people, a couple for marriage. Like here is you can be of so much value and wonderment to them in the most special day of their life, that if you can get to them, this is your vocation, this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And it can be marvelous if you nourish it and understand the commitment, and as we well know about marriage, the challenge it is to stay in love with each other, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in about a month, you are going to have a major life change.
Right.
And I know it's already started, but I think perhaps it'll feel even more dramatic on the 16th of October, I believe, is when
18th. Yeah.
18th, when your successor takes the space over and everything. So, have you been doing any reflecting?
Well, let's put it this way. I guess I submitted my letter in April of '75, so I've had a year and 3 months knowing that someday this was going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it probably wouldn't go beyond a year. It did by 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reflecting in so many things that I'll have to get more disciplined about it. I think for the first 6 months I want to sit back and wait, maybe clear my own desk, and I mean that the desk in my mind and the desk that I work at, you know. I think both things. I have been mentally so involved in the work of the church, so involved with travel, so involved with doing this and this, that you know, I lived a kind of a life where you really didn't have many moments to yourself.
Mm.
And I realize I've got to be careful, because I just can't switch that all off. I must do it slowly and figure out some other things to do, some of which will be to be available to the new bishop.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a little about that, a willingness, and I'll be quite willing to do it. He is inheriting a situation where you travel to the western part of the diocese of Alabama, 5 or 6 confirmations or stuff like that. That there are times perhaps when I can do some of them, and
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't have the burden of doing all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one area that I can be helpful in.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like maybe to go back and spend some time in places where I've been. Augusta for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
Columbus for 12 years, and revisit with people that I know. My first 2 years in Augusta were magic in a way. Here I am, a new priest in Georgia for the first time, and I'm wondering about them and they're wondering about me. But out of that only 2-year experience, I made good friends, and I remember people from those first 2 years that I don't remember about people that I met just 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was what you call the tabula rasa. My mind was taking on stuff for the very
Mm-hmm.
first time in learning to be a priest.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to do some of that.
So here's a question.
Mhm.
If you could have a meeting if Bishop Kevin Boland of 2011 could give some advice to brand new Bishop Kevin Boland 16 years ago, what would you tell him? What advice would you give that terrified looking man in the photo that you showed me in your office a couple of weeks ago?
I don't know. I guess I would have said a lot. First, I mentioned, you see, I had an advantage that I had a brother, a priest, so I could call him every day if I wanted to find out how you do this, how you do that.
Did you call him every day?
Quite frequently, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't remember how often, but I talked to him quite frequently. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big bear me up. The other thing that was very strengthening to me is, and I guess that's what I would just re-verify, put trust in your priests,
Mm-hmm.
because they're looking to you to give them guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So that maybe I should have been more definitive about that, where I was very scared about it.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember how am I going to talk? The clergy conference happened about a week or two after I was made a bishop, and I didn't know. I was scared driving over to Albany. I remember where it rotates, like these guys know me inside out. Here am I now going up to give my 2 cents worth about the value of the gospel or what it says or doesn't say, you know. So I survived, I think, those things. And in time I discovered I could do this with a great sense of confidence, and I wasn't afraid anymore, you know what I mean? But it took me, I'd say it took me a year or two to do it, you know, easy year or two, you know. And so what advice would I give? Well, then there's the whole concept of prayer. I kind of came to realize very quickly, Boland, if you don't say your prayers every day, at least you can say you did that much. And you might not have done much more, you know, or you fouled things up or messed things up. You gave the wrong advice. Or you were indecisive in a situation where you should have been far more decisive and things like that. I'm inclined to be a person who is I listen and maybe then I figure I haven't listened enough or something like that, you know. But I can be strong once I have my mind made up. But I like to get a lot of input in it. I've wandered now from your question.
No, you're doing great. Well, so when you think back on your 15 years as the bishop, how have you personally benefited spiritually, or how have you grown intellectually?
I have grown by having a marvelous broad view of the church. Not only the Diocese of Vanna, which has been my family, they're my family that I served directly as a bishop. For them was I ordained. And they've been most welcoming, most generous, most open to the mind of the church. So I've grown that way, you know, that I can embrace this family any day of the week. I can go any place in this diocese and I'll be welcomed as the bishop without hey, yeah, nay, you know. That's something, you know. That is. Okay. On the broader picture, you automatically become a member of the Bishops' Conference of the United States. So I became one of, let's say, 250 or 260 bishops. We meet twice yearly. Very, very good meetings, well crafted, well put together. I can sit here and say the body of bishops are one of the most magnificent group of people that I've ever worked with, been part of, or generous in their time, in their friendship. And I'm just so proud of them. I'm proud that the church has produced people like this, you know, who are a credit to the church. Then, so that's the broader level of the big church on the national level. And then on a kind of an intermediate level, I got the chance to serve on different committees. I chaired here am I, kid in the block. And because of the quirk of circumstances, I got elected to be the chair of the Marriage and Family Life Committee, which is a very significant committee, and has done great work, and continues to do so. I was just chair for 3 years, and so this is the other part of that is I got elected by the body of bishops to the Catholic Relief Services. First time round was Boland, who's now the Archbishop of New York. Tim Dolan. He ran Kevin Boland, Tim Dolan, and the Archbishop of Newark, or the Archbishop of Louisville, Kentucky. What will come to me? And we were kidded after we got elected that a law firm had now taken over the CRS. Dolan, Boland, and Joe Kurtz. Yeah, Kurtz, Dolan, and Boland. I think the Kurtz was kind of kind of a Jewish throwaway almost, that type of thing. Kurt, Boland and Dolan. Well, I got elected twice, like through 2 3-year terms, which is the max. I'm finishing my last 3-year term this year. And so CRS, Catholic Relief Services. I just sent a letter to all the pastors that we have a global group of fellows where if a parish wants to bring in someone to talk about CRS, all they have to do is call up a number and we'll arrange either for a priest or a lay person to go in there and tell them about CRS, what it does, what the nature of it is. It's not a second collection, it's not anything. It's just to develop awareness of what the CRS is, Catholic Relief Services, to people all over the world. And the outreach of the Catholic Church. Now, because I was on that and I was willing to travel, I went to Zimbabwe in Africa, I went to Nigeria in Africa, and I went to Indonesia in the Far East. And Medan, I landed in Singapore, then traveled from there to Medan, and from Medan up to Banda Aceh, where the tsunami was held in and officially visited groups of homes that Catholic Relief Services had built. And you would have a special platform up in this kind of village of Indonesia, and the head of the village, what did they call them that? They were they were not the mayor, but the equivalent, say, in Indonesia. And they would have a special talks and thanking CRS, and we'd have to come up and put a garland or something on us and give us a gift. And on the way out, I'll show you the gift that I got from Indonesia, from the people of Indonesia when I left. Especially that part of it's the northern tip of Indonesia where the tsunami did so much damage. They gave me this beautiful gift which I got framed. So if I'd not been a bishop, that would never have happened to me, never. So I've been enriched as a person, beyond measure.
So have there been things that you've learned about as bishop that you have taken, like, are you now sort of an Indonesia file or anything? Is there something that you've been exposed to that has just sparked a personal interest in you that's caused you to read more about it or study?
Yeah, well, certainly I've read a little more about Africa, especially from my visits to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has always left the impact on me that Mugabe was the president, and he's probably a corrupt leader, has robbed his people left, right and centre. Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket of Africa. It supplied. Now it doesn't have food for itself. Its people doesn't have no schools. All the teachers have disappeared down to South Africa because they can't get paid. And so economically it's just a complete opposite disaster. So did I learn? Yes, I've read a few books about that. And even in my reading today, when I read about something happening here or there in Africa, I'm much more familiar with the different countries of Africa, things like that. But I'm not, I'm actually going to write to CRS and say, my 6 years is up. I want you to keep me in mind, because as a retired bishop, I probably could do more for CRS now than when I was an active bishop, And in other words, I wouldn't mind traveling again. First of all, it was a two-edged sword. I like to travel, I like to see new places. And then the other part of the sword is, well, you're going into the most impoverished, poor parts of the world, You're not going to Bermuda and stuff like that, But they were great experiences.
So when you look back over the period that you served the people of Savannah as bishop, do you have any general or particular regrets? Perhaps about decisions that you made or things you didn't have the opportunity to do, or?
I can't say. If I have any regrets, is that maybe I didn't visit them enough or be with them enough, that I spent too much time in administration. and you become, in a way, you can become what I call envious of your status or something. I don't know how to put that. And I'm not sure if that's a regret or not, or you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I would certainly would have liked to have more time to spend more time with the people. So many places I would go into and I'd only be there a day, and then I'm on my way again, and I would be saying, I won't be back there for another 12 months,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I found that very, very difficult, because you could not build an awareness of who these people were and
Mm-hmm.
what they were doing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's some historical dimensions. I've kind of had a yen for this, and I hope to do it maybe in the next month or two, in Alapaha. A lovely name, isn't it?
Mhm.
Alapaha, an Indian name. It's a small town on Route 280 going west. And one time I was there, and they said, would you like to see a cemetery? And I said, okay. And they took me to the cemetery out in the woods, which goes back to the 1800s. And where the Catholics buried their dead that long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to go back and visit that. I think I'd appreciate it more. But the first time you see it, what is this all about? You know,
Mhm.
what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I told them that, and they said, sure, we'll. So they called Ginger, my secretary, the other day, and the bishop said to us he'd like to come. So I'll try and do that. Now that's something I could do when I'm retired,
Mm-hmm.
because I could always go there, and a weekday I won't have any appointments back here as such now, and
Mm-hmm.
do some of that. On the wider picture, there, you know, I had regrets when I had to remove priests from ministry. They're the tough things to do. And they're regretful in a very kind of personal level, because I knew I was going into a parish that was hurting because of
Mhm.
that, you know.
Was it, are those regrets as in you wish you should have done it differently, or you just feel sadness that you had to do
Sadness
it? Or-
that I had to do it, yeah,
Mhm.
right, yeah, yeah.
But you
Yeah.
don't think that you think you did the right thing?
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, thank God I'm very careful with those situations that I had to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't lose sleep at night with them, you know. That,
So how do you think history will talk about Bishop Boland, who served Southeast Georgia in this little corner of the United States?
yeah.
50 years from now, maybe.
I could, yeah, okay. I'd respond twice. Yeah, does it make any difference?
Okay.
You know,
That's a good answer.
yeah. 50 years from now, does it? I guess there's enough ego in this. You'd like to believe that it will be good, or it will be
Mhm.
positive, let's say.
You are a historical figure,
Right, yeah, right.
whether you like it or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, but I guess, yes. But, you know, but I look back on my predecessors. Most people know very little about them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're historical figures, you know.
I was going to ask you
Yeah.
about that. This is sort of jumping back. So when you became the bishop, did you read some of their writings of your predecessors, and who did you sort of resonate with that you read? If you did, how far back did you read?
Yeah, well, I read bits and pieces of them from different, maybe
Mm-hmm.
different histories, if you know what I mean. But I didn't do an in-depth study of them,
Mm-hmm.
or of any one of them. But I did take time out to, like, I could tell you where they were buried, and
Mm-hmm.
so when I went to Washington D.C. and I knew that one of the bishops was buried up there, I was able to find out the name of the cemetery, and I went there and said a prayer at his graveside
Mm-hmm.
to be associated
Mm-hmm.
with one of my former bishops. And I've kind of a yen for doing things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
what will happen historically? I'm just hoping I'm in heaven reading about it, you know. because it's not going to help me to get in there if there's either good or bad. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I was going to ask you something. It just went right out of my head. Oh, so will you continue to celebrate Mass?
Oh yes, sure. Yeah.
So, how you celebrate Mass daily now?
Correct.
So, is that something that every priest, and I apologize for not knowing this.
Oh, that's okay.
As long as you stay as a priest, you celebrate Mass daily.
Correct.
So, where will you do that?
Well, I've a chaplain in the home I live in. Yeah.
Okay.
A bishop is allowed to have a private chapel in his
Mm-hmm.
home, so I'll do it there sometimes. But I'll also, Mark Ross from St. James calls me up and he says, you know, I have to go out to town tomorrow. Could you cover the 8 o'clock morning mass? And I'd be glad to do things like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, so now let's see. I want to see if there's anything else that we talked about the future of the church. We sort of talked. It sounds like I was going to ask you a question about what is next for you professionally or vocationally, but it sounds to me like your interest in Catholic Relief Services is sort of a continuation of a vocational.
Well, I'd like to
experience.
follow up on it, but it may not happen for me, if you know what I mean. Now, if that doesn't happen, I'd like to see, can I play an adjustment where I'd be helpful to the diocese, both the parishes, especially with helping occasionally. I've already got two offers, kind of to give a Lenten retreat in a parish, and I think there were 2 Lenten retreats. And I'm not sure if I asked the priest, I said, okay, give me time to think about it, because that's work.
Yes.
And it's funny, to give a retreat is different from giving a Sunday homily, let's say. Give a retreat, that's long term, and you've got to develop a particular theme and maybe give 3 or 4 talks. Sunday Mass, you know, is one presentation in itself. But the fact that they asked me, plus I've never given myself any grandiose ideas that I'm a good spiritual director or that I'm a good retreat master. I don't know. Maybe I'm better than I think I am. I don't know. That's a very hard thing to judge. It's kind of self-evaluation, which is always basically weak.
Right. So, I understand that you're involved with something called the Apostolate of the Sea.
Apostleship, that's right.
Yes. Will you continue to work on that also?
Well, that could involve becoming a cruise chaplain.
Oh, well, there you go.
That's one part of it. But the other parts of it are programs for the mariners of the sea. And I've done very little of it being the bishop. But it's an appointment that is, again, it's something I don't know at the present time. I think they're going to reappoint me even though I'm retired. They made inquiries of me, was I willing to be reappointed in retirement? And I said, well, you better find out if I can do it as a retired bishop, like maybe there's constitutional difficulties. They said, not that we know of. So the appointment, obviously, strangely enough, comes from Rome. You know, it's connected into the Apostleship of the See on the kind of a universal level. And every country has usually a bishop appointed, and then he's supposed to work with the local parishes or the local dioceses that have people, like, for example, we have a Father Richard Higgins who works full time at our port, round the clock. And he does marvellous work for them. He goes on their boats, he says Mass for them. And this is strenuous work. You might have 3 ports come into Savannah within 5 or 6 hours of each other, and they're going out within 5 or 6 hours of each other. So his window might be 5 hours, you know, if
to do 3 masses.
To do 3 masses. Well, maybe, like the window for one might be 5, the next might be 6, so just maybe to go from one to the other, that type of thing. You know? Yeah.
So then,
I also I wanted to put in whether it's what did I most enjoy about being bishop? And what I most enjoyed in the generic sense was the opportunity to be with the people, but to celebrate ordinations to the priesthood has to be a high point for the diocese. you're ordaining your future ministers.
Mm-hmm.
So they were big occasions, and they were beautifully celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
Not on account of me, the music, the candidates themselves, their teachers, the seminaries they went to. I'm there as the cheerleader,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then now, in this case, I'm no longer, at least as a cheerleader. There came a time when I appointed them to their first appointments and all that. I had one man come to see me today about various things, and totally unexpected. He's doing very well in his new appointment. And so I said, I've got to go, I've got Mass at 12. So he just reached over and he says, thank you for ordaining me.
Oh my.
Which was something, you know. See, I never thought of it in that sense, like from his point of view, not that he was ordained a priest by me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So there was already confirmations. In time, I got to really like confirming young people. Because not only did I discover if I could do it well, that's very dangerous. If I could do it well, that's dangerous. It's dangerous in the sense it must be spirit-filled. You must recognize that the priesthood is God's gift to me, not I. It's not because of me. You know, it rests. The first priest is Jesus Christ. I'm part of his priesthood. So whatever good I do comes from the mystery of Christ, birth, living, dying, and rising from the dead. All of that I do comes from, theologically, from that mystery. So when I say, if I do it right, well, yes. If the Spirit is with me and I'm doing it because of, I can impact on the child, the parents, the godparents, and lots of other people who are actually present at the ceremony. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's so marriages. When I was a priest, I loved doing marriages,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I mentioned about doing funerals.
Yes.
You can touch more. Now I did some funerals. I made a habit as a bishop. It's difficult to be made a bishop in your own diocese because I knew so many people when they died, and they kind of, for a while, they would expect me to do the funeral, and I was very careful about that. Someone kind of told me about that.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get in the way of the pastor. That's his primary job.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to the funeral, and at the end of the service, give a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you do that for a family, they think you're God on wheels.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone thinks you're God on wheels, you've really got to be careful.
God on wheels, that's a good one. So, when you mentioned you just said it briefly that someone had advised you
Yeah.
when you became bishop
Mhm.
not to, not get in the way of the pastor.
Right.
So, who are the advisors that you?
Well, in that case, it could have been Bishop Lessard, my predecessor,
Mhm.
who would have gone. He was bishop for 22 years,
Right.
and he probably learned, whether he had, this I don't know because I forget who advised me. It could have been my
Right.
brother, it could have been another bishop or something like that. Because it would have been particularly keen. I came from, for example, I had 1,000 families at a big parish of St. Anne's in Columbus. So I was grateful for the fact I was 240 miles away.
Yes.
They knew that I could not get to every, dogfight that happened,
Right.
whether it was a marriage, a funeral, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to have been at a lot of these affairs, but it was just both not only physically impossible, but physically yes, because I couldn't travel, but the amount of work that I had to do for other people and for other parishes, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
I could not be showing preference all the time
Mm-hmm.
to one group of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
So we talked a little bit about what is next for you professionally or
Yeah.
vocationally. Any other things that you can think of that or are you still checking, sort of
I'm
thinking?
still juggling. I am.
Mhm.
I'm juggling lots of things.
Okay, well, how about,
I don't know what I should. One thing that I thought about 12 months ago, but I've not checked it out.
mm-hmm,
And then after checking it out, I don't want. Maybe I should not have maybe I'm not going to be around enough if I want to travel. That type of
Mhm.
stuff. I'd love to. I got in that wouldn't it be lovely to be able to teach someone to be able to read, an adult? But I don't know what's involved. I don't know how difficult it is. I don't know how much time you have to give. I don't know if I have the skill set to do it even, you know. But when I go out, sometimes I go to a coffee place and pick up a newspaper to relax. I find that relaxing. A decent newspaper, like is well written. And have often struck me, there's lots and lots of people who cannot do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it cuts them out from so much. Well, it kind of cuts them out. Because if you cannot read, you cannot write.
Mm-hmm.
But they can listen, of course. So maybe that's why television is so popular. But I had that in the back of my mind, the concept of kind of giving back to someone. Another thing I'd like to do is read more of Flannery O'Connor. She fascinates me, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a good reader. I'm a slow. Like when I say I'm not a good reader, I've got to the stage where I can't concentrate long enough, you know. Because I think I'm maybe physically tired, and maybe that will improve, you know, that type of thing.
Perhaps when you don't have so much responsibility,
Right? Yeah.
it'll free up some
Exactly.
space.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I want to ask you one last question, and that is about Gertrude and John Boland. So, what is their son Kevin going to do now, and what do they have to say about how their son turned out?
It's hard to talk about that, but I will. They are proud beyond measure. My difficulty is they were such good people that I don't think I'll ever measure up to their goodness. And my father died the year before I was ordained a priest, so he knows it from the heavens. My mother saw me ordained a priest and died 2 years before I was made a bishop. And what can I say there? They struggled to educate me, to feed me. And we were not poor. We were probably a middle-class family. But I only knew that maybe after I became an adult, you know. We'd always enough to eat, we were well clothed. But like I know it was hard going, now that I can look back on it. And in my era, to have a priest in the family was a great honor. That's probably not true today. I don't know why, I'll kind of as catharsis in a way, but like I still tell the story, okay, if there's case notes, kind of equation. One of my memories of my father, I remember he died at the age of 59. I was 23 years of age, so I had not matured into understanding his full capacity of what he stood for and how principled he was. I would look upon him as a very devout man, and so was my mother, in different ways. Their spiritual. I'm looking at this from a distance now. But when my brother Ray was ordained a priest, and then spent his holidays in Ireland, time came for him to come to Washington D.C. That's where he was ordained for. And he came out as I did on my first trip by by liner. That's the way you travel. Jet travel was not that common 50 years ago. And because we had friends, they arranged with us to go out and the liner would come into Cove Harbour, but it couldn't come into the dockside because of the depth of water was not good enough. So it came into the inner harbour or the outer harbour. And then you went out in a smaller boat with all the passengers who were travelling to the United States. They called it tender. And usually the only people on the tender were the people you left from dockside, and you said goodbye to your people at dockside. But in my case, one of the superintendents knew my family, and they gave tickets to my father, my mother, myself, and maybe my other brothers, Frank and Tony, my two younger brothers. And maybe, so we as a family went out in this tender. So when the time came for Ray to go up the couple of steps into the liner itself, my remembrance is of convulsive crying of my father. And I never did see him again. He died. Well, he saw him in death, but he died the following year. In hindsight, I knew what extraordinary people. So they can keep me humble. They were better people than I ever will be. I can tell you that. So what do they know today? I hope they don't know all the bad things about me.
Bishop Boland, this has been a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to sit with you these 3 days. And
you've seen a part of me that no one else has, I can tell you.
Well, I feel greatly honored to just be for the time and for the candor, and I've learned a lot. Is there anything else that you want to share with me right now about your time as bishop? And then we will, if there's anything else down the road, you can always call Mike and say, tell her to, don't forget to add this. But for now, anything else you want to add?
No, well, no, not just on a more objective manner, it's hard to conceive how privileged, and I hope at least I've done something good with it, how privileged was the whole mystery. I use the word mystery at times because I don't comprehend it. How to becoming a priest, come to Savannah, come to Georgia, be a pastor in various places, and become the bishop of the place, and to be enriched beyond measure by people, places, and things, and I will never understand why. I will never. I'll go to my grave not understanding why. You know, it's becoming the bishop, like very significant honor and designation. And I just hope it hasn't gone to my head.